very simple graphic, a circle. And let the circle represent the hoop. Both, you'll notice that it is continual. There is no end and no beginning. So it's eternal, and yet everywhere that you are on this circle has a little different perspective, right? It's always changing. So it's not stagnant, but it's always there. And you can enter the circle at any point. No beginning and no end. And this is the framework for the hoop that we will build on. So here we add the directions. Here we have the 8 directions, and this is like a compass. There's a compass in the middle of the hoop. And this compass grounds us in physical space. This allows us to orient to our physical environment and the ways that that environment might shift and change based on what happens in these different directions. And this, I will suggest, is a framework or a map or a calendar which we can use towards helping us reintegrate with our relationship with wild things. And we see in the directions, if we're talking about the directions from our perspective of living on this landscape here in the Willamette Valley, the east, what happens in the east? The rising sun. The rising sun is the fresh new day. It's the time when we wake up and we're full of energy and we're thinking about what's going to happen next. We're visioning, we're maybe making plans. And then, so I forgot to say, this is the path of the sun also that we're mapping here. Not only is it a compass, but it's the sun wheel. So as we move into the south is the place where the sun is at the peak of the sky, and it's the hottest in the south. That's where all the heat comes from, right? Because we're in the northern hemisphere. If we were in the southern hemisphere, this whole map would be different. So the south is the place where this is the peak energy spot. This is where things are really producing. And in the west is this place on this where the sun hits the setting horizon. And it's the place where the light begins to fade and we're entering into dusk. And we're maybe getting a little sleepy, or we're thinking about putting food in our bellies or catching up with our family and friends that we haven't seen throughout the day. And getting ready for dream time. And then in the north, this is in the darkness. The sun, it never is in the north from our perspective, where we are on this earth. So the north is the resting place, the point of quiet and integration. So we can also add another layer to this map here. And this layer speaks to the actual wheel of the seasons throughout the whole year. And I've used the Celtic holidays, the Celtic solar holidays, because my ancestry is Celtic, and it was what I was speaking to about how it's important for me to integrate some wisdom and knowledge from my own ancestry with my knowledge of the actual ground that I'm standing on. So that's why I use these words. But it could be totally different depending on what your ancestry is, and this is going to be different depending on each culture and place where we are. But I'll go with these words for now. So we start in the spring equinox. That's the time when the days and the nights are equal length, and we're having there's a sense of balance there, and kind of like a pause as we feel the equal lengths of the day and night. And the spring equinox, that's also the time when the plants are really getting revved up at this time of year. It's like the weather's gotten a little warmer and they're putting on growth. And then we move to Beltane. Beltane is traditionally, it's a fertility festival in the Celtic tradition. And that's the time of wanting to reproduce. In the south, we put the summer solstice, because the summer solstice is the time when the days are the longest that they ever will be. So it corresponds with that solar south power, abundance, vibrancy. We move to the southwest, and we are at the festival of Lammas. And this is the time when the sun is beginning to reduce. The power of the sun is waning. And we actually really feel the days beginning to shorten now. It's kind of like the whole summer just feels like, oh, it just lasts forever. And then we get to Lammas and we start noticing, oh yeah, things are really starting to shorten up and we better get ready for winter now. So this is the time of the first harvest. This time when we really start reaping in all those seeds and fruits and stuff. And so then we get to the autumn equinox in the west, and that's the time again where the days and nights are the same. They're equal. But at this time, we're not looking forward into the light, we're looking forward into the darkness. And so what's all those things that we need to do to prepare for the winter ahead of us? And this is also a big feasting festival time. And to the northwest, Samhain is another word for Halloween at the end of October. And Samhain is the festival of the dead. It's the time when we honor this transitions of things dying and the importance of death. And at that time, you better be ready for winter, because winter's there, winter's coming. And so that kind of marks the end of the harvest season, the last of the harvest of the fields. And then to winter solstice. Winter solstice is the deep, dark rest time, when the days are the shortest and the nights are the longest. And we spend time indoors, internally, looking inward in that kind of death resting place, maybe dreaming about what's to come, but not taking any action on it yet. And the festival of Brigid, named after the goddess Brigid or Breed, in the northeast. This is the time of year which is called the quickening. And this is the time when the first lambs are born and when the first baby shoots of the plants peek up. And it's the time when the days begin to lengthen at a rate when we can really tell they're increasing. So it's really the celebration of when we can tell spring is coming. I point to these things because I think that having seasonal festivals and celebrations where we connect with our family and our communities is really an important way of reconnecting to our place. It's the same kind of energies that we see cycling in small cycles and big cycles, longer and shorter. So east being the time of dawn, right? The rising sun, that's pretty easy. Noon being the time of being in the south with the heat of the sun. West being dusk, where the sun is setting. And north being midnight. So there's so many different layers to these microcosms. And here we are with the four elements. The element of air in the east, the air is clear, we can see through it, but it's the element of vision. The element of fire in the south, obviously, it's hot there, right? Water is in the west. Conveniently to us, this actually makes sense because the ocean is in the west for us, so it's very appropriate bioregionally to have the water in the west. And this is also, the water is the symbol of abundance and harvest. And the earth being in the north with the deep, quiet, stable groundedness. So we can also look at this in the framework of just one plant's life cycle throughout their own year. And generally, we could see these patterns in the plants kind of on a large scale. Many of the plants are doing these things at these times of year if we're also looking at it at the time of year. But we could also just see this map of the plant life cycle in one individual plant, which might not be doing it at that time of the corresponding year. So it's more looking at the energies or the symbology of it. So I'll start in the north this time. The north is the place of germination. And germination in the north, because that if we correspond that with the winter solstice, that's the time when the sun is reborn, right? We're still in the darkness. The seed hasn't sprouted yet. Nothing's coming out, but there's a little activation, a little burst. And so then in the northeast, corresponding with the time of Brigid or early February, is the time when the seed actually sprouts and it comes out. And in the east, corresponding to the spring equinox, is the time of leafy growth, where the plant's just really putting on all it can. It's photosynthesizing all it can to just get its leaves out there so it can be ready to reproduce when Beltane comes in the southeast, when it's full in flower and it's trying to mate and reproduce all it can. And then in the south, it's already been fertilized, but it's putting its energy into growing those fruits and growing its body and maturing. In the southwest, corresponding with the time of Lammas, it's the time of the first fruits, when those fruits are actually ripe, and all that work that you put in throughout the south and the summer is paying off. And then in the west, it's time for that fruits, those seeds, to disperse out into the world and to distribute themselves so that more plants can come again next year. And in the place of the northwest, corresponding to Samhain or Halloween, it's the time of the plant's death, where it moves into dormancy and rest. And there's always that period of rest, which we so often skip over in this society. But that rest, that death point, is really important. And when you put them all together, you can see the energetic correlations of where they are in their wheel. And there's many other layers that we could put on this, which we don't have time to do right now, but layers about our own inner process, about the life cycle of one human being, or the learning process that we go through when we're learning something new, and or perhaps community dynamics, conflict resolution. I mean, you could use this as a model for any kind of system that you want to understand deeper. Here's a different kind of a graph, but still based on the same thing. And you'll see that we put the solar holidays around the outside this time. And this is a map of our modern lives with wild plants. And this is kind of based on indigenous knowledge of different seasons of when it's appropriate to harvest the plants and tend the plants. And it's also based on my own personal experience and a lifestyle that I'm working on developing for myself, which is more grounded in the seasons. And so what we see here is that in the spring, the first ring, the white ring around the outside is the ring of the plant seasons. And you'll see it starts with greens at the time of Bridget in early February. Spring, oh man, if you've been living off of stored food all winter long, dried foods, you are so excited that those greens are coming back. The little juicy, tender greens are full of nutrition. That is just such an exciting time. Sometimes those early spring greens on certain plants have even specific words for them in different indigenous languages that don't refer to the rest of the plant, but just that tender spring shoot that you eat first thing in the spring. So greens, that could go all the way to summer solstice, maybe even longer. If you go up to the mountains, the greens are around longer than that. And it depends on which plants you're picking in, of course. So also in the spring is the time of bark, both medicinal and edible. Certain barks are used as food, particularly in times of starvation. I've had some really delicious Douglas fir bark, for example. Not the outside bark, but the inner bark, the cambium. And the reason why we harvest it in the spring is because that's when the sap is flowing. And so it's both easiest to take the bark off during that time, and it's when all the nutrition's in it, because the xylem and phloem are moving up and down the tree, and that's when it's best to eat it. So barks in the springtime. Also, that would apply to medicinal barks, perhaps redroot or cascara, maybe dogwood. Many other barks that you might want to harvest would happen in the springtime because that's when they're easiest to peel. So then we move into late spring, around Beltane into summer is a time of the edible roots. Many people think of harvesting medicinal roots in the fall time after the plant has, put its energy back into the roots after reproduction, which is great. And most of the edible roots that we use as staple carbohydrate crops are available in the spring and summer when they're flowering or right when they're going to seed. Because if you wait too long, then the plant dries up, it goes to seed, and the whole thing just blows away. And so you can't even find it after that. So that's really the root time, and you're just digging as many roots as possible and storing them and drying them for later in the year. Which also overlaps with the berry and seed season. season in late summer into the harvest time of llamas, and that's pretty self-explanatory. Berries and seeds, they're going off. They're going off right now. And into the fall time, there's a time for nuts and acorns, those fat crops, maybe pine nuts. Acorns have a lot of really nutritious, powerful, good fats in them, and that's appropriate because you're heading into the winter time, so it's nice to have the fat crops right before you go into that cold, dark time. And of course, fungi in the fall after the rains come and the temperatures start to give a little cold snap that stimulates the fungi to grow. So on the next inner circle, it's the like purple bluish circle, we put some words that are corresponding tending activities. These are activities that when we're in relationship with these plants and we're harvesting them, we're also doing the things that help the plants survive better, right? So in the spring, corresponding with greens, I put plucking. Fancy word for just picking the green, right? So because when you pick a leaf, it stimulates the plant to put on more biomass. It'll create more leaves and potentially, depending on the plant, perhaps more root growth if you pick its leaves. And then in the root time, we have tilling, which I already spoke to about with the camas, but that tilling helps aerate the soil and create a new spaces for new plants to grow. And so just by the act of digging your food from those roots, you're also giving back to those roots and helping that environment be more conducive to those roots sustaining themselves. So in the berry and seed time, for tending techniques, we have seed propagation. And this, in indigenous lifeways, this often happened where people would collect seeds and then set fire to the prairies. And then after the fire came through, they would go back and re-sow a bunch of the seed. And sometimes the seeds were edible and they would keep those seeds, keep part of the seeds for food and then re-sow some of them back to replenish their crop. And through time and time of doing this, people would actually establish practically monocrop stands of edible wildflower seeds. Where in California, they say in the Central Valley, you could go through and just see miles and miles and miles of one color of flower blooming in the spring or the summer when it was that time, that flower's time. So seed propagation is really, really important. Another way that we propagate berries is just by eating them. I mean, funny enough, we eat the berries, it goes through our digestive tract, and when we let those go back onto the earth, we do it in an intentional way, we're actually helping those berries propagate, and more bushes can sprout from the seeds that we ate and gave back. So that's one of the most beautiful examples of reciprocity in action that I can think of. When I'm eating the food, it tastes great, I just let go of what I don't need, and the earth loves it, and it's replenished just from that simple act. In the fall, we have root division and transplanting. When it depends on the root, depends on the plant, of course, but that's the time if you had a fibrous rooted plant or a rhizominous plant with underground stems, that you would divide up those plants and maybe move them from place to place. And moving those roots around helps stimulate the growth of those roots also. And of course, also in the fall we have fire, very important, which I've already talked about some. But that the late summer into fall is the traditional time of fire. And when I work with fire these days, I actually work with it in the winter because there's such a buildup of biomass from people not burning for 150 years that you kind of need to do it when everything's really wet so that it doesn't take off and create really, really hot wildfires that destroy things. So, and that corresponds with what I put in the winter, which is forestry, which is something that I've been doing for the past few years, is learning how this is kind of a modern tending technique, and it's based on the fact that we haven't had fire in so long that there's a lot of built up extra plants that need to be cleared out so that if fire could ever return in a healthy way, that it needs less biomass. Yeah. And also in the winter is coppicing, and that means cutting down shrubby plant stems to the base, and we use those plant stems for like weaving and crafts and whatnot, and that helps the plant, it invigorates the plant, and that plant will resprout with a lot more straight vigorous shoots that grow long. And in the middle, there's so much in this graph. 3 examples of places, actually physical locations, habitats where you might be when you were doing these kinds of activities and relating to these kinds of plants. And there's lots of stuff I left out, but just as an example of like, oh, when I'm doing tilling of the roots, I'm usually in a low elevation grassy meadow or a steppe habitat, which would be eastern Oregon. And when I'm harvesting all the berries, well, a lot of the berries I really like are high up in the mountains, and that's when the abundance is. So that's where I am when I'm doing that work.